All right, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear this coming through there? Great. I want to thank Ryan for inviting me. Probably almost a year ago, we started planning this out. And I really want to thank everyone here at Elon University, and particularly in the philosophy department and the philosophy students who have been kind enough to read some of my work so we can have some more in-depth conversations tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that, and mildly fearful because they are very well up to the task, it seems, from what I've already witnessed. So it should be a lot of fun. It's also already been a great day. I've eaten twice here, which is great. I got to cook with some students in the cooking club, so they helped me to arrange the desserts for tonight. And then I just had a great meal in this building and some great conversation. And so here we are. So now I get to talk about some things close both to my intellect and my heart, which is a good place to dwell. So the talk for tonight is entitled Cooking is Interpretation. You might have noticed on the posters that it says Cooking as Interpretation, but I'm feeling a little frisky tonight. I'm thinking comparison is not enough. I'm going straight for the ontological claim. That cooking is interpretation, and hopefully I can deliver on this. What do we have? Oh, thank you very much. So what do we have for this evening? Well, let me, by way of a menu for tonight's lecture, and I do want to ask, I don't do this generally with live cooking on stage. This is not something I've done. This is completely, this is completely new. This is a room full of guinea pigs in a certain sense. So we'll see how this goes. But the plan is this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of my work, and then I'll introduce a philosophical idea that I have that's pretty much the impetus for this discussion. We'll talk a little bit about what cooking is, or at least what I think cooking is, and how it might apply to that philosophical idea. We'll talk about interpretation. And this is for those who are maybe not philosophy students or are new to philosophy. This is where there's going to be a little bit of heavy lifting. So if you don't want to throw out like cerebral hamstring or back or something like that, we'll get through that section. Hopefully I've got some tricks to make that a little bit easier. We'll talk about recipes, and in particular recipes as interesting texts. We'll do some cooking. We'll do some eating. And then some final thoughts. So that's the plan for tonight. So let me talk a little bit about the context of where a project like this arises. I think first and foremost, I have an idea that I've been working with. I think some of the philosophy students have probably come across some version of this in some of the things that they've been reading in preparation for tomorrow. But we can think of a thought along these lines, that eating is not merely a means to biological survival, it's a fundamental way of human being in the world. That, I like to think of humans as gastronomical creatures, and that we have a way of being in the world that is not just related to food, but that is through and through related to our quest to feed ourselves, to live, and also to enjoy. That this is what it means to be a human being. Now, how I've translated this on my campus, trying to bring mindfulness about food to the things that we do in the dining hall. So I work with undergraduates in a research group that I formed 4 years ago called EAT. The idea is to break down the barriers between the dining hall and the academic spaces, and to allow a kind of open and free thinking while we eat, that it could be a place for discussion, but moreover, so that students could design research projects focused either on sustainability, or on food ethics, or on nutrition, or on diverse cultures, and then work with dining services to bring about those changes in the dining hall. And this has been a lot of work, but a lot of great work. And we've made some wonderful changes, and due in great part to not just excellent students, but also our dining services staff. So if anyone has questions later about this, I got all sorts of stuff to share with you. I'm also a member of the executive committee of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, which is, in a sense, very much like my program at LVC, the EAT Research Group, but on a national scale. It's organized by the Harvard School of Medicine, by the Culinary Institute of America, Stanford University, and Google. And our idea is that if we want to change the food system for the better, that college students are the ones who are going to ultimately change everything. And so we have to present them with the opportunities in their dining halls with ways of thinking differently about how they eat, how they procure their food. The habits that you form now when you're making food choices on your own will be the habits that will most likely be with you for the rest of your life. So we're trying to bring research onto college campuses that is connected between the dining hall, academic departments, and administrators, and then hopefully see where that goes. So this is, the Research Collaborative is now in its second year, so we're really just getting started. We have 3 research projects we're implementing nationwide, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll start to have some results. What does this all have to do with philosophy? So I think everything begins in a certain way for me with the dinner table. I began merging food and philosophy, trying to explain what I did as a philosophy student, as a philosophy grad student, to my family members who had no idea what it was I did when I was studying philosophy. It was something completely out of their realm of experience. That has grown into all sorts of ways of thinking about how we relate to food. So I have a couple of ideas here. The first has to do with cooking as a form of philosophical practice. What if we thought of it not just as a technique that we deploy, but as an analog, maybe even a mode of our own philosophical thinking? Could the act of cooking instigate the kind of conceptual reflection that we strive for in philosophy? I have another idea, and this is something that runs through a great deal of my philosophy, that if we have to define philosophy, that philosophy is thinking that liberates, that this is the goal of philosophy. What does it liberate us from? We'll see if we can bring this out in the talk today. And my idea for tonight specifically is that cooking, like philosophy itself, can be a form of liberation. That cooking is a path to thinking differently about the world in which we live. Why should cooking be approached as an act of interpretation? And I think the answer is in the how we approach this question, not so much in the what or even the why. And this is a contentious idea. The history of cooking is in many ways a history of bondage to our environment, to our physiological needs, to hierarchies of social and political power, to low-wage labor, difficult hours. The list goes on. In many ways, the history of cooking can be viewed as a history of our dependencies. I would like to suggest that we can and should view cooking as something more than either a simple antidote to this or just a set of rule following or procedures for our own nutrition. I would suggest that somewhat paradoxically, cooking satisfies our needs precisely by transgressing them. I'll put that there. I forget slides I have sometimes. So let's talk about the art of cooking. For the purposes of this talk, I will define cooking in rather simple terms as the application of a set of techniques and processes to foodstuffs. An application in order to make them more edible, nourishing, and/or palatable to eaters. Cooking is a purposeful process of transformation. Such a definition, however, belies the rich context in which cooking has unfolded and continues to unfold. Cooking is never just about the preparation of food, but in its purpose and expression reveals relations of power, reflects the undulations of tradition and geography, and chronicles human advances in technology. It is not by accident that I've used the phrase, the art of cooking. I intend to take this phrase in two senses. On the one hand, that cooking, in all of its expressions, employs a certain set of skills and techniques that are unique to it. And on the other hand, that cooking should claim its rightful place among the fine arts. That cooking is an art. I will not dwell upon this second, rather interesting idea tonight. All I will say is that even today, despite evidence that the art of cooking and the celebrity chefs seem to dominate the popular as well as the elite cultural landscape, a cooking or a tasting station would still be an unexpected sight in a traditional artistic space. Think, for example, of an art gallery or a theater filled with gastronomical performances and edible works. Cooking, as a part of the science of gastronomy, differs from the fine arts because it is driven by a specific end and limited to certain media. The medium is always the edible, and the end is always consumption, nourishment, and in the best case scenario, enjoyment. So I want to focus turn my focus a little bit to the artistry of cooking for tonight, and in particular, the role that recipes play in the cooking process. Because I think this reveals a certain tendency in our thinking. It's a tendency that resists the artistic sense of cooking and considers cooking instead to be the work of the artisan, of the technician, and the practitioner of a certain set of skills. And I think for most of us, this is kind of a relief. We have recipes to follow. Picking up the skills of cooking is challenging enough without the additional demand that we all be artists on top of it, that we all be celebrity chefs. Because there's another reality that all cooks must face. Cooks cannot create out of nothing, but must work with what's available to them. Whether it is the careful prescriptions of a recipe or the array of items scattered throughout the pantry or refrigerator, we are looking for something. We are oriented towards the familiar, the understandable, and the recognizable. Even when presented with a challenging ingredient, we most often attempt to place it into a known context. How can I use this thing? So let's take a little bit of a break. I've yammered enough. Let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine that you have to prepare a meal. Do you prefer the guidance of a reliable and tested recipe? Or are you an experimenter in the kitchen who avoids cooking from a script? If you were handed a set of ingredients, what would you do? This is our thought experiment. I forget what's left. Should mark that down. So what would you do if you were presented with this? Think through the experience. Could you make something with this? Does your mind immediately go in a certain direction? Thinking, I'll just drink the wine and I'll figure the rest out. How bad could it be? Wines and crepes or something, find flour somewhere. But I imagine for some of you, this is, oh no, what if he calls me up there and I just have to figure this out? And and then people are hungry and they were promised dessert. It's gonna happen. Or maybe you're thinking, I got this. I've done this before. Not so bad in the kitchen. Whatever your thoughts might be at this moment, I think there's something in there that tells us a lot about where our society is. How many of you have ever used a service like Blue Apron or something along those lines where they send you the food, it's got the recipe, it's all portioned out? A couple of you? I think this speaks to a certain way of, to direction that we're moving in, which I think is positive, that we want to get back in the kitchen, that we want to make real meals. We want to not just be taking stuff out of a box and microwaving it, but who has time to learn how to cook? Who has the energy to think up what's the better recipe or the best recipe? And especially if you're a little bit adventurous, do I have to think of all the adventures myself, or can I have someone send me the adventures, the culinary adventures? So I think we desire that sense of both fulfillment and adventure, and we respect the skill that's there in the kitchen. I think it's also why we like shows where professional chefs are given ingredients like these and then they got to battle it out. Whether it's Iron Chef or it's any of the other reality shows that have emerged over time, we find it fascinating when someone can take the things that sometimes are lying around our very house and turn them into something wonderful. And the term for this, of course, watching TV shows about food is this wonderful and interesting word, gastroporn. You're just watching something that you cannot enjoy, that you cannot taste, but somehow it triggers something in it. It's like, I always think, it's a strange segue, I always think of this with my family. What do Italian Americans in New Jersey do when they're having a meal? They talk about what they're going to have at the next meal. They're already planning, thinking, oh, what's for dinner tonight? We're in the middle of lunch. Okay. Now, we'll come back to this. So this is where I've been pushing my philosophical training in the non-food world towards my philosophical interests in the food world. And this is where I said it might get a little bit heavy, but bear with me. Let's talk about interpretation. I practice a form of thinking that's called, and here's your fancy word that you can drop at the next cocktail party, hermeneutics, theory of interpretation. Hermeneutics begins as a theory and method for interpreting texts. We can think of the long tradition of Talmudic interpretation, but we can also think more recently of legal scholars interpreting the law or literary critics interpreting texts. Interpretation is always something more than just translation. An interpreter does not simply exchange meanings in order to connect two languages or two worlds. To interpret is to create a world, to accept as given a certain ambiguity in life, a demand for meaning that resists our simple passive reception and requires that we give to a text or an experience as much as that text or experience gives to us. So in the waning years of the 19th century, we have the beginnings of a broad philosophical theory of interpretation. We call it philosophical hermeneutics. Interpretation no longer is a mere method or technique used to bring about a specific meaning or goal in a text. It's not a method for reading, but it's a general theory of human existence. The way that I experience the world is an interpretation. My understanding of the context in which I find myself is the product of these ongoing interpretations. To exist for human beings is thus always to be interpreting, to live through interpretations of the world around us. And so my claim is this. Similar to the manner in which a great actor interprets the lines given to a character in a play and turns them into a living performance, or a musician interprets the notes written on the score into sounds on their instrument, or a dancer interprets the rhythms of a musical performance into bodily motion, or a poet interprets the meanings of lived experience into language, that a cook interprets the qualities of edible materials into gustatory experiences and sensory events. Interpretation is here brought forth in its proper form as transformation in the fullest sense of material, of artist, of audience. To interpret is to accept, to inhabit, and to encourage a certain type of transformation. So, in order to explain more fully the sort of transformation I will ultimately, that is ultimately embodied by the art of cooking, let us first consider what I believe to be three maxims of interpretation from the field of philosophical hermeneutics. Do I have a slide here? Oh yeah, we got maxims. We've got the hermeneutic circle. We've got the idea that we can understand the author better than he or she has understood themselves. And we've got the idea, oh, my little S fell. No facts, only interpretations. Now, these maxims aren't encased in those little, this will be our little mnemonic device for coming back to these in a little bit. Let me just talk about these very briefly as they play out in philosophical hermeneutics. So the hermeneutic circle describes the way that an encounter with a text or a work of art or even our own lives unfolds in a circular manner, rather than experience the world as a subject who stands apart from the objects around and outside of me, or who encounters a text by applying a certain technique of reading. One finds the relation to be more reciprocal. When reading a text, my ability to comprehend that text is brought to it out of my own history, and likewise, that text brings new information to me that shapes who I am. So think of a book that you read and that you enjoyed, or a film that you viewed and enjoyed when you were a few years younger or many years younger, and your understanding of that. And then think of that experience when you have, it's like, oh, I can't believe I get the chance to watch that movie again. And you go to it, and it's a different experience. You are no longer the person you were when you first watched that film. But you are also right now a person who has been shaped by that experience. You have incorporated the experience of that work into you, and it has likewise shaped what you have become. This is the hermeneutic circle of understanding. And we can think about this. And sometimes my students ask me, oh, it's like a chicken and egg thing. No, it's not. Sort of. But we'll use the egg anyway, right now. This will help us to remember it. It's not a chicken or egg. It's neither the text nor it's me. It's both. They're related. Okay. Second maxim. The idea that we can understand the author better than the author understood himself. What? Sorry, Shakespeare. I got this one. No. Perhaps we need a little bit of that wine to give us the courage to make that sort of claim. But the idea is not that my understanding is better in some absolute sense. What happens, the idea behind this maxim is that what I bring to that text that does not necessarily inhabit the same world as mine, is not a better understanding in the sense of it having a greater value. It's a better understanding perhaps just because it's able to come at it from a perspective that the author, him or herself, could never have imagined. This could be maybe the vast knowledge that we've acquired in the 20th century when I bring it to an ancient text, but it could also be the very specific experiences and issues that I might have as a certain member of this society, rather than the position that the author of the text was in when they wrote that text. So this is, number one, opens up all text to new interpretations, but it also means that my interpretation will be subject to the same type of revision. Okay, and then the third one, that there are no facts and only interpretations. This is the sweet, sweet reality that we live in. This is why the sugar is there. Imagine this. I mean, it's frightening to think that we are just going to give our facts away and that everything will be open to interpretation. But I think it's more than a proclamation of relativism or the idea that anything goes. The force of this idea rests in the way that it proposes two levels of discourse. One that is contained within a certain context, the facts of chemistry or the facts of molecular gastronomy or a particular work of literature, and another that aims to expose the conditions that make such discourses possible and gives them their sense. What does it mean for these various discourses, these different types of truths, to coexist in our world? And what would it mean to accept the possibility that they might be ultimately incommensurable with each other? and that no one has legitimacy over the others. We can entertain the idea, and maybe the sugar's needed to make this all a little bit more palatable, that ultimately we're not going to have that moment where we all come to the same understanding. But that this tension, but that these differences might be positive and productive. That's very central to the idea that thinking can liberate us, is the idea that there are no ultimate facts, but that we find ourselves in interpretation. Okay, so we'll come back to these. Let's think about these maxims. So if we return to my initial definition of cooking, we are interested not so much in the science or the chemistry of cooking, which enables its own sorts of transformations, but rather with the way that the action and artistry of cooking entails the interpretation of a set of givens, what we find here in front of us. And this is our jumping off point into recipes. Okay. So what kind of knowledge is encased in a recipe? What kind of text is a recipe? In the most basic sense, a recipe is a list of ingredients and a set of indications about how to combine, prepare, and transform those ingredients through cooking. A set of instructions to arrive at a gastronomical end. This is how we think of recipes today. A recipe is also, however, a prescription, an order to take and to do. Written in the imperative, its command is still recognizable if you think of a pharmacy and the symbol with the R and the X. This is the command to receive, to take. The origin of actual recipes is a little bit more obscure and complex than this. We have written recipes from the ancient world. The supposed oldest recipe is one from Samaria for beer, which is both great fun, but also kind of necessity. You can purify water in this way. It makes the water safe to drink. But certainly also oral recipes, now long lost to us, predate and postdate these ancient culinary texts. Ones that not only encoded the daily cuisines of people around the world, passed down from generation to generation through retelling, but also through demonstration and practice. But these recipes nonetheless prescribe the elaborate offerings of foods to the god and to the dead. These are recipes also for remembrance and for loss. So we can start to think about, recipes to me are really fascinating. So this is the oldest, supposed oldest recipe for beer. If anyone could read that, please. That'd be awesome. We can make some after we make dessert. This one right here, this is Mark Bittman had been doing this in the New York Times Sunday magazine for a long stretch. And it kind of shows, I think where we are, at least now in a sort of American food culture. And it's this wonderful set of, I wouldn't call them full recipes. He would feature an ingredient. This week it was spinach. And then here are all these different ways of preparing it. It's sort of like a quick thumbnail sketch of, okay, I'm getting bored of the same old spinach. I could do it this way. I could do it that way. And it requires a little bit of cooking knowledge, because not all the instructions are there, but it's both visual and gives you enough cues that if you have some facility in the kitchen, you can multiply your offerings in some way. Now, recipes are also much more than these types of techniques. I associate recipes with people and their faces, with smells and sounds, with places and feelings of embodiment. Recipes are not simply committed to memory, but to the practice and practices that are separate from but essential to the recipe. Cutting and slicing, sautéing or braising, and even the careful selection of ingredients for the dish. Knowing which herbs are which in the garden, which fish is freshest, which cut of meat is right for the preparation. These are skills that in many ways form the condition of possibility for recipes, but they are the ones that are never written down. Perhaps I would speak of them as a set of instructions, but more often as demonstrations already underway. Words merely augment and flavor the performance. In this way, any recipe only hints at the implicit body of knowledge it already presupposes. So I was thinking about this talk, I thought, well, let's put some more recipes side by side, because I was kind of interested in what sort of things they did. So on the left, this is a recipe for piñolata. This is a Christmas time dessert from Sicily. So maybe you've seen them. It looks like little dough balls that are stacked into a pyramid. This is my grandmother's recipe that towards the end of her life, my aunt transcribed and then has been passed around. And I'm the poor soul who around Christmas time has to roll out all these little dough balls and then coat them with honey. But if it's not there, then it's not Christmas for certain members of my family. This one on the right, I remember this very particularly. This was an evening in the summer of 1997 when I had gone to visit some friends in New York City, and I quickly, who are not people who cook, but then I thought, well, it'll be fun to make a dinner. So I kind of sketched out my ideas for a dinner with some so we've got techniques on the left, and we've got the ingredients on the right, and we've got a salad, we've got crostini, we've got pasta, we've got dessert, and the dessert's kind of custard in cups and all this kind of stuff. So this was folded up and stuck in my pocket and has remained since then. My aunt's handwriting and mine are not dissimilar either, which is weird. So we have memories encoded in recipes like this. And then I was kind of going through my thing of recipes. So I've got a sort of standard looking recipe on the left. And then the one on the right's not a recipe at all. It's actually an assignment for my freshman philosophy class. But it looks like a recipe, right? And this is what we ask students to do all the time. It's like, you got all these ideas, now cook them up into a paper. And there's a set of instructions at the top. And just as new cooks are a little bit fearful of getting burned and not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, I think most of us have had that experience, myself included, with that first philosophy paper. We were like, see how this turns out. But it's a kind of recipe for reading and for writing. And then I was also thinking, like, recipes are things that we annotate. So once again, on the right, you've got a classic Piemontese dish from northwestern Italy called vitello tonato, which is a strange combination. It's veal that's been boiled, which is already strange for Italians to do something like this, and then it's covered in a tuna sauce. It's a classic dish of the region. So when I lived there back when I was just fresh out of undergraduate studying in Torino, I bought this book, and it was like the code of like the most authentic recipes from the Piedmont region. And so I was kind of both translating and figuring out how to make it and getting suggestions from mothers of friends of mine who'd say, no, you don't make it like this, or you add that. And then on the left-hand side, that's not a recipe either. That's a page out of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason that has similarly annotated notes on the side. So this is from when I was writing my dissertation. It's the kind of thing, it's like, yeah. You're building something, you're augmenting, you're interpreting these texts. They are shaping you, you are shaping them. And whether it's a talk that I'm giving, like I'm doing tonight, or it's a meal that I'm preparing for someone, every time you approach it, something is different, something is transformed. It's not just simply what it is. And I think food, given the variability of ingredients, even more so. So at this moment, I think, TJ, where'd you go? I think we can bring some fire to this operation, and we can begin our prep. We have to heat up the engines before we launch this rocket into space. But let me talk a little bit more about recipes while this stuff is getting fired up. Let's go back to our maxims. But now let's think about recipes. So the first maxim, remember that? The chicken and the egg? The hermeneutic circle. So the art of cooking on this model is more than just the imposition of a technique or a method upon certain ingredients. Cooking is something more than just the application of skill, but has the potential to transform both the ingredients into something more than their sum, and the cook into something more than just a technician. Dare we say, an artist. The experience of cooking brings us in touch with ourselves and our surroundings, those who might eat our food, those who made it possible, and of course, the ingredients themselves. Successful cooking is sensitive to the needs of those who will eat, formed and shaped by the quality and the availability of the ingredients, and even influenced by the power and type of cooking instruments at hand. One brings one's experience to bear on the situation, and the situation tests, shapes, and even threatens the abilities and practice of the cook. That second maxim, this is the wine. This is where we have to have the courage to understand the author better than the author himself. This idea not only has powerful repercussions for discussions about food culture and authenticity, a discussion for another day, but for cooking specifically, and suggests that a recipe or a technique or even an entire cuisine is open to revision and transformation every time that it is prepared, celebrated, and enjoyed. To eat is to revise. To cook is not only a transformation of the ingredients in a particular dish, but the transformation of that dish's very meaning within the ever-changing contexts of its preparation. We are not merely readers or cooks, but we are also authors and chefs. And then that third scary maxim about there being no facts and only interpretations. Let me suggest that cooking is interpretation when various methods, techniques, ingredients, and preparations are in play for the cook. So not just in the sense of it being a game, but they are to a certain degree up for grabs. Think of that old car that you borrowed from your grandmother that you can drive down the highway and go like this and still it goes in a straight line. You know, there's lots of play in the steering wheel. That one, that there's room here. And that no one method or technique necessarily dominates over another. At every moment, the cook confronts and explores possibilities. A quick glance at the history of gastronomy reveals these moments. And when cuisines are fused, new techniques are employed on non-traditional ingredients, and the cook wishes to stretch the limits of what has been done to experiment with the novel and the unknown, one sees this maxim in action. In the sensitivity a good cook has given the circumstances of any given preparation, one finds a reliance on this idea. The tried and true methods, the facts about what counts as cuisine and what doesn't, don't always apply. Here there is not only a great flexibility in the cook, but an understanding that truth is something plural, that what works now might not work tomorrow. It is a maxim that enables a chef to survive in a world where there is no disputing good taste. And so I think these three maxims hint at the liberating potential of cooking. Recipes that are opportunities for possibilities. And I'm always drawn, so there's an Italian philosopher by the name of Luigi Parson who I've spent a lot of time working on. And in his aesthetic theory of interpretation, he talks about the idea of, and there's really not a good translation for this in English. The Italian word is spunto. Now, a spunto would be a suggestion, a hint. If you're on stage and you forget your lines, you know, when someone gives you your lines, they give you that cue, that's a spunto. You know, it kind of pushes you to remember what was there. But the wonderful thing about this word, which is in many ways what gives rise to our creative moment, what inspires us to think about the truth differently, is connected to the word for your recess time snack that Italian school kids eat, the spuntino. It's kind of what gets you through the day. It gives you that little boost that you need. So I like to think of recipes like this. I think someone had brought this up too. We had wonderful scones this afternoon that Dr. Cahill made. And I was thinking about, you know, and someone was describing the method you use to make these, or to come up with the recipe. And it's a recipe that it's a method that I really like to employ as well, which is you kind of try lots of different recipes, you kind of hear how people do it differently, and then you sort of figure out, okay, this is sort of the broad range in which this food item exists. How do we pull these elements together and come up with maybe what's an original recipe, but inspired by all the different ways of doing these things, and still within the realm of all those techniques. Okay. Now, how are we doing on water over here? Let me take a stroll to see if we're Berlin. Almost there. Okay. Then I get to call people up. All right. So this is where we are. So remember that thought experiment? It's no longer a thought experiment. It's now just an experiment. So this is what I want to play around with today. So a recipe alone is not cooking, just as a score all by itself is not a musical performance. How is cooking interpretation? Well, the recipe gives us a starting point, but it also points us towards its impossibility and its absence. That is, to the original recipe, to the original prescription, to our very existence. To omnivores like us, the world is a text to be read and transformed. So let's ease into this ambiguity. Not all recipes are clear sets of instructions. Not all recipes are user-friendly. They resist, they're particular and peculiar, and they prescribe to us a reality that is not necessarily our own. This is the wonderful experience one can have eating a new food, but then also experimenting and trying to make it. So let me boost this recipe a little bit. What we're going to make tonight is what is known as Zabaione. It's Italian dessert. There are actually more spellings of it depending on where you are. If you even do the French version, there's a French way to spell this. But pronounced roughly the same way. Zabaione would be with a little GL in there. And the simple recipe that I want to work with today is this 1:1:1 ratio. 3 egg yolks, 3 teaspoons of sugar, and in this case, 3 tablespoons of the sparkling wine from the Piedmont region of Italy, Moscato d'Asti. And we'll just combine these ingredients, whisk them in a double boiler, and then everyone's happy. Because you get your fat, you get your alcohol, and you get your sugar. And this is all you need. So, TJ, are we pretty close to a little bit? Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll go one more paragraph, and I think we'll be just about there. Or actually, so what does this text tell us? This is a recipe I cherish the most, and perhaps the dessert recipe I have utilized the greatest number of times. Let me ask this: how many of you have had this before? Yes, it is this, and this is a common and strange reality, which I haven't quite figured out. I mean, there are popular Italian desserts. This is not one of them. So easy, so delicious. And maybe it's because we have all sorts of other custards or custard-like things. But just egg, sugar, and wine. It's the simplest, and in some ways also the most demanding of recipes. It's a recipe that has no definitive history, only competing stories of historical origin that range from the Dalmatians in the east of Italy to the Piedmont in the west, from peasants to royalty, and across the etymological register. Like many classic recipes, there's a great debate over its authentic ingredients and modes of preparation. Marsala wine or Moscato d'Asti, the entire egg or just the yolks. A copper bowl is the only way, perhaps, some will ever double boil. Some even transgress the most natural symmetry of the 3 ingredients and have different proportions. Blasphemy. Recipes retain their religious and ritual heritage, but what would it mean to find, let alone prepare, something like an authentic Zabaione? What sort of knowledge must one possess to arrive at such a verdict? I would argue that a recipe just doesn't allow for such considerations, and that any such claim to authenticity is highly suspect, if not downright disingenuous. Not just about Zabaione, but about anything. Okay. How about 3 volunteers? Okay. We got another one there. One more? Okay. Yeah. So we need. So what I wanted to do, or what I hoped to do tonight, was that we would have some actual preparation of dessert. We've pre-prepared enough for everyone. And it would be strange to talk about cooking, and cooking is interpretation, if we didn't do some actual cooking. So I'll give you some step-by-step instructions. They're really straightforward. So what I would ask is you can actually put the ingredients into the bowls before we set the double boiler on top of the pot. So once again, we've got, and I think, TJ, you're going to dole out the yolks. And so, yeah, you can add your wine and your sugar. And then the method of double boiling is what allows this to be brought to a safe temperature as you're kind of whisking and whipping air into it so that it grows. But it doesn't scorch and cook the eggs too quickly. So this applies a gentle heat to it. And the real art of it, of this preparation, is how much air you can whip into these egg yolks. So you can place your bowl on top of the pot. And then just
One of the flames went out.
Did we run out of fuel there, you think? Yeah, why don't you?
Start whisking.
Yeah, start whisking.
You start whisking too, you better.
And once you got a feel for it, I would, don't be afraid to really crank up the RPMs.
Oh boy.
Anyone a drummer in here? I'm a drummer, so it's all ride cymbal technique, like fast jazz. You just point it downwards and just go for it.
Is it in the wrist?
Yep, it's all in the wrist. Your arm will tire out too quickly. Yep, it should be good. So you'll see it'll start to get a little bit foamy. It'll start to thicken. Yep, that's getting real close to what you want there.
Oh boy, she's doing it.
I got this taken down.
And you might kind of give it like a big swirl to incorporate it. Yep.
Gosh, you're killing it over there.
So let me give it a little keep stirring.
You told us our arms would get tired. You were right.
You're not using your wrist, man.
I am.
So you see how it's starting to cook there? Yeah, you just want to keep that moving. And let's see.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
you're good. Okay, so we're done here. You can take that off the heat if you wish. Oh, careful. And do we have a spatula to serve these up? Oh, you've got a spatula right there. And then you can dole those into those cups.
Guys are slacking.
And let me get around your right side. Oh, I'll get on your left side. So you've got, I just want to,
Say, oh heck.
can I test the temperature on that guy there? Let's see. Oh yeah, I think you're absolutely done there.
That's a relief. So what temperature does one bring?
160 would make it food safe. 160 Fahrenheit. I think this looks like
So
it's
just like put a little bit into a cup?
Yep. Yeah, you can.
Take out the heat.
Yeah, we can take up the. Yep, that one's done too.
If we're supposed to be serving this to everyone, better save a little bit for the next.
Oh no, we've got a whole bunch in the back.
Oh,
So this is
this is a
the live experience.
Oh, I'm glad to be a part of it.
All right.
Front row seat
You should
for your
taste it.
trouble.
I think you're the only one who's going to use it. Yeah, you're done doling it out.
Food safe, but not finger safe, guys. Gets hot.
Good memories.
Yeah,
Back to
exactly.
childhood. My interpretation of this.
So, can I get names of everyone who's up here? Monique,
Mitchell?
Mitchell,
Grace.
and Grace. So Monique, Mitchell, and Grace have had the courage to prepare this for us live with this very sparse recipe, so let's thank them. Recipes, I think, rarely have authors, and when they do carry the signature of their creator, one should at least be a little bit suspicious. Recipes resist authorship, even though they demand our reading and cooking. I learned to make Zabaione from a lost friend, one who is conjured up with every new preparation. How many times did we make it? How many times in her absence have I made it again? What remains of our collaborations? The dish is rather simple. She would both state and command at the same time. 3 ingredients. She always insisted on Moscato, not Marsala. Arranged in threes: 3 yolks, 3 teaspoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of wine. The right amount for 2 people. An egg each, 1 to share. Separate the yolks, combine the yolks, whisk in a double boiler until it's done. How do I know when it's done? When it can stand on its own. When it is what it was not before. Practice, experimentation, testing. That's when you know. Then I will have it. I will have myself, my new self, forever transformed by a new knowing. So the text of this recipe is not one that I can forget or discover in a drawer, but in a way it is also a veil that resists my complete seeing. It's a text, actually before this evening, that I've never put into writing, as close to an arche of cooking as I might ever find. A limit that all of my cooking, all of my thinking about cooking, all of my thinking in general can never transgress. It is bound up with those tactile memories, a paradox if there ever was one, and will die with me. A sort of shroud piled and enfolded with all the others, the sloughed skin of the original fall and all those subsequent skins amassed in a final totality. To recall a life is to leaf through a pile of recipes, familiar and reminiscent, but not at all the life itself. What then does it mean to speak of a recipe for reading, for interpreting, and for cooking, as if texts were in need of preparation, transformation, and presentation? Isn't it the case that texts impose themselves upon us and demand for us to respond, whether we are capable or not, and to offer some kind of verdict? Reading is a kind of cooking, and like all cooking, it is a preparation, pre-digestion, transformation, and a path to liberation. This is the leap we need to make beyond mere analogy. A continuity, retained in diminution, a lead we are commanded to follow, a touch we hold in proximity to thought. It is what Catherine Malibu refers to as the primitive future of texts, a style of reading and writing text that is neither traditional nor deconstructive, but rather plastic. That is, forming, resisting, and like any good cooking experiment, able to explode. So we might ask, if we go back once again, one final time, to our 3 maxims. So when I asked you to taste this dessert, and we had different ones. We had 2 versions of the one back there. We had the live cooking model. We might ask on that first maxim, the hermeneutic circle, what did it bring forth? What words do you impose upon it? We have this circle of having it remind us of things, placing it into the context of what we know, but from this point forward, your life now always includes this experience, this Zabaione. In that second maxim, we might say, what are the standards that allow you to judge this work? The work of our volunteer chefs, the work of the recipe, the work of a tradition that has created this idea for a food. What newness will you bring to its meaning? Can we understand this recipe in a new and different way? And in that third maxim about there being no facts, only interpretations, can you even taste the authenticity? What would that mean? Or instead, is this the taste of freedom from any dictatorship of taste, an opportunity to learn something new, to become something different. Cooking has created something for you, but cooking itself has to be experienced. So maybe this is part of that answer to the question before that you were asking. It is a challenge and a demand to face up to the given, to the text of the world, our bodies, our culture, our resources, and to interpret it, to transform it into something meaningful, nourishing, and enjoyable. Right there, at the point of what we share, is also what divides us. Taste. What makes us all unique, and yet what we all share as a common experience. Here is the liberation, the joyful oscillation between identity and difference. This is what I had said before. So some final thoughts. Thus, one must consider the interpretive art of the cook, its very singularity in relation to the plurality of truths that surrounds it, which is also an equality that binds us all together. De gustibus non est disputandum. There is no debating taste. Everyone has the right to their own taste, and on this basis, one legitimates the grounds, however fluid, for the dismantling of hierarchies, the recognition of otherness, the absolute singularity of aesthetic phenomena, and ultimately an equality among individuals. An equality found in our differences. The goal is to get to a point where we no longer need a recipe, I think. Or perhaps that we are able to see recipes everywhere. Prescriptions that beckon forth from the world around us. What once seemed barren or confusing is now fertile with possibilities. We are not tied to a dependency, but liberated through the possibilities as they present themselves to us. This is an antidote, a prescription against forms of realism. The given should not constrain us, but set us free. It should not be a set of limitations, but a set of opportunities. Whether the given reality acts in this way or not depends on our reading of it, our common reading of it, and whether we bring to reality a sense that it can be read. To cook in this sense is always to be reading. That is, moving forward with our understanding and actively transforming our reality. And to read, to interpret our reality, is to cook, to make our world more palatable, more nourishing, dare we even say, more enjoyable. So I always end with some concluding thoughts. So if we step back from this idea of this cooking experience, I might say, in general, make the table an occasion rather than an obstacle to thinking. We had that experience just before this talk tonight downstairs, and it was wonderful. Share your food, share your thoughts. You are almost never eating alone, even if there is no one with you. I like to talk about this as the paradox of the modern food system. In a certain sense, we have the danger that our connections to other humans are more tenuous and minimal than ever before. But they're also more numerous than they've ever been before. We are in contact with more people through the act of eating than in so many other ways. All of the individuals who make it possible for our food to arrive to us. Put them in your thoughts as you eat. Strive for something beyond sustenance and survival for yourself, and most importantly, for others. And I believe this deeply. The bar should not be nourishment. The bar should be enjoyment. That's what we owe our fellow humans. And challenge yourself as an eater and as a thinker through encounters with new foods and new invitees to your table. These are experiences that you'll remember. These are experiences that will transform you and those around you. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who made this possible tonight.